G'day, how you doing? Adam Williams here from Easy Way Photography. Here we are in Broome at the gorgeous Gantheaume Point, these incredible orange and red rocks with this gorgeous turquoise blue water. And what I want to run through is, I want to add a little bit onto what we learned in the last video, which was our landscape photo settings, which if you remember were to set our mode to aperture priority, set our aperture to f22, and then our ISO was on our recommended base level, depending on our camera, somewhere between 64 ISO and 200 ISO. However, what that's going to mean is on aperture priority, the camera is going to choose the shutter speed for us to get what it thinks is the perfect exposure time or the perfect exposure. That gives us no creative control or no control over the exposure level. However, that's what I'm here for today. I want to show you something called exposure compensation. It's this little button here, and there'll be one on your camera too. The icon's a little plus minus icon, so what I want you to do is look up in your camera manual for exposure compensation and figure out exactly how to use or just set the exposure compensation, because I'll show you exactly what that does here. So basically, if I take a setting with no exposure compensation on, just let the camera choose exactly the perfect shutter speed. At this point it wants to shoot at 1/125th of a second. Okay, beautiful. That will give me a nice even exposure or a nice centered exposure where the camera thinks would be best. However, if I feel like that needed to be a little bit brighter, I could hold down, in this case on my camera, I would hold down the exposure compensation and push it up maybe a half or one stop. So if I hold down that, and look, this might be different setting your exposure compensation on your camera, but as I said, check that out in the manual. But on my camera, if I hold down that button and just wind to the right, it goes up in 0.3s roughly. So it goes 0.3, 0.7 and one stop. So let's go with one stop. You can see the camera now is sort of dancing between a 60th and an 80th. So that's going to give us a much brighter exposure. And in actual fact, that's starting to blow out our whites a little bit. I'm starting to clip those whites, and potentially that exposure is no good. So, you know, if I did want it a little bit brighter, maybe winding back to, 0.7 or 0.3. Let's try 0.3. Okay, and that was about an 80th or 90th of a second there, and it's absolutely beautiful with no blown highlights. On the other side of the scale, if we wanted to maybe darken down the image, if the image was too bright, or we just wanted to get creatively moody with a dark image, we could hold that down. And this time I scroll to the left on this camera, and let's go down 1.7. So 1.7 of a stop there. You can see now the camera wants to shoot at a 250th of a second, which will result in a much darker exposure. Yeah, much darker indeed. I think probably, given the conditions, and we're in the middle of the day here, which gives a beautiful turquoise water, which is what I was hoping for. But given that being the case, I don't think I really need to mess around too much with exposure compensation, but I just wanted to give you an example of exactly how you can take creative control of your exposure when you're shooting in aperture priority mode. Thanks again for watching along. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.